Alright, so I recently finished playing through Trials of Mana, and I'm not gonna lie, it's been a while since I've looked forward to playing a game this much. Mainly thanks to Theater Rhythm. I was going through the DLC there, got a little curious as to why the first Mana game was part of the Final Fantasy series and then they rebranded after. Turns out that it's because it was more of an action RPG and not turn-based like I thought the series was. I definitely like action RPGs most of the time, because something that's kind of similar is top-down Zelda. Obviously, the Mana games brought in a few extra RPG elements, but it's like I have tried and tried and tried. I really wanted to get into top-down Zelda. I thought the games looked really good, but I don't know what it is about the top-down perspective, but I rarely, if ever, am able to get into those kinds of games. I don't know what it is. So naturally, I could care less, probably an unpopular opinion, about a second Ocarina of Time remake. I want to see a Link to the Past remake with a shifted behind-the-back, third-person perspective to shake things up and to maybe be appealing to people who just can't get into top-down games like myself. And this Trials of Mana remake did exactly that. So, was it that easy? Was shifting the perspective enough to get me to really get into one of these games? Honestly, yeah. Granted, I will admit, I think it would have been better if they kept a top-down perspective as an option for purists who may not be into this idea. But I think it is a really good idea, because I feel like with a remake, a lot of people want something that's really familiar but has some sort of twist to keep it sort of unique and new. And I feel like switching to a popular perspective that makes sense for the game works incredibly well. I mean, we've seen it with the first few Resident Evil games as well work out pretty well. One thing that did throw me off a little bit with it, though, was I was actually thinking that the game would feel a little more like an Ocarina of Time-esque game, being sort of, the progression of these kinds of games. But I feel like there's just such a different philosophy when it comes to level design for these different perspectives, to where this winds up feeling a lot more in between than anything. It would take a lot more to make it feel a bit more like an Ocarina of Time-esque game. But I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing or really even necessary. I feel like this stands out and is fun in its own right. One thing that wasn't very fun in this game, I'll admit, was the backtracking. Like, the closest comparison I can think was when I was playing Metroid Prime. And when I was, in new areas, just progressing, I was having so much fun. But then I made it to backtracking, and it took me a bit out of the experience at points. But unlike Metroid Prime, I mean, in this game, you can sort of just whiz by enemies. There's no difficult traversal that you sort of have to repeat going back and forth over and over again, where I did still feel like it was a waste of time and not fun. It wasn't enough to, make me quit the game like I did with Metroid Prime. But I do feel like an easy quality of life thing could have been to have added the ability to fast travel between the different Goddess of Mana statues, even if it's just the somewhat rarer gold ones, so that there's a little less back and forth. Especially, too, this game encourages 3 playthroughs, and, that definitely helps make that a bit rougher. Granted, I was able to push through a second one because, I'm not going to lie, it was kind of fun going in a New Game Plus scenario with an item that ups how much experience you get. Just slashing through all the enemies really quick, leveling up super fast, watching, the general time you spend in the different areas get cut by more than half, skipping through the cutscenes and that sort of thing. On top of having different protagonists to, see their different class skills, their different class promotions going through. And just overall, for me, going through in more of a speedrunner-esque mentality versus that first, taking everything in, searching all the nooks and crannies, getting used to everything type play style. One other thing I didn't like, though, was so by the time I made it to the second playthrough, like I said, I'm just trying to go through really quick. I wasn't interested in collecting the chest. The little cacti, not a big deal. You get some pretty good rewards for them. There's only 1 or 2 in an area to begin with. Looking up, the 1 or so that you're missing per area isn't that big of a deal. But when you have, a lot more chests, I essentially reached a point in my first playthrough where I didn't have enough little cacti to mark off on the map, because that's one of the rewards for them. How many chests I found versus didn't found in each region. And by the time I got that in my second playthrough, I was skipping chests and barely had any of them cleared. So just a bad balance the way I played there. Maybe that's more of a me issue, but I would have liked some option around that, I guess. Another thing I will say is combat is pretty simplistic. Granted, there are a lot of different mechanics you can utilize, like you have different items, different mana abilities. You can switch back and forth between your different party members. And obviously there's different attack patterns with enemies for you to dodge in that. But when it came to the actual melee combat itself, I thought, everyone felt relatively the same. And I feel like the most efficient combo was always your latest class combo. So basically, when you first start, your highest combo is light, light, heavy, and then when you get promoted, it's light, 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 heavy, and then there's another one that's, you can probably guess. That was always the most efficient way. I don't know, maybe the damage you do sort of builds up throughout the combo, and that's kind of why. And the combat's fine for what it is. Like, it didn't really take me out of the experience or anything, but I would have preferred maybe some more defensive options, the different characters to feel a little more unique, and maybe a few other combos that could be efficient in their own right. Oh yeah, you do also have certain uses of charge attacks with certain enemies that'll have a shield. Actually, I think if you're looking at the background gameplay, yeah, there's a few that have the shield that you need to break with a charge attack. And I don't know, maybe part of that was the difficulty I was on. I think I played through on easy, maybe normal, but I think it was easy. And then when I did my second playthrough, I was on beginner just to speed things up even more. But yeah, bosses were pretty fun, I will say. I normally wasn't talking about soundtracks too much, but for some reason the last few games I've been playing have had something noteworthy, and in this case, the soundtrack's really good. I don't know if they share a composer or sort of came up around the same time. I know they're on the same system, but it reminded me a bit of my favorite Final Fantasy soundtrack from Theater Rhythm, Final Fantasy VI, so that's obviously a very good thing. I was playing the remix version, I will say, though, too, but in general, I feel like when it comes to character design, world design, the soundtrack, even with the updates, it feels exactly like an updated version of a Super Nintendo game, which is exactly what I feel like you would want from this sort of thing. One thing that kind of surprised me with this game, though, was it coming out when it came out. Because obviously, like I said, I really like the premise here. I really want to see more games do this sort of thing in remake form. But they released this right after the Collection of Mana, which had Trials of Mana finally available in more regions. With the translation, granted, maybe that was kind of because they were doing this and already doing the translations, but I don't know, I just find it kind of weird or concerning, because I don't know how this sold or anything, but I can imagine a lot of people just sort of being like, well, I just played through this game on the collection, why would I play through it again unless I was really into it or really interested about the perspective shift and the extra content, which I think is mainly this post-main campaign dungeon, which was, in general, okay. So it's a lot of recycled environments, but with sort of remix in terms of having a filter go through it, a different order in sort of moving from area A to area B, and some, general filters so the area is a little unique from its original form. And it all makes sense with, the story they sort of laid out in that. But I don't know. I just really was looking forward to getting to New Game Plus. And I feel like if you played the original, that this amount of content is really good. But when you're initially playing this and, like I said, ready to move on, it just felt like it wasn't going to end. It was also pretty fan service-y in terms of bringing closure to things I feel like may be divisive in giving closure to, if that makes sense. Like, I guess mild spoiler alert, but basically a lot of it is they bring deceased characters' spirits in to be like, oh, you did a good job, my death isn't your fault, I'm so proud of you. And I know some people, might like that sort of heartwarming closure for these characters, but at the same time, I do also generally like, keeping the scars that sort of led to the growth that you've had in this journey, if that makes sense. Overall, though, I think this game is definitely more than worth checking out, at least for one playthrough. Like I said, I pushed through 2. 3 was a bit much for me, but maybe it won't if you don't have as much of a problem with some of the quirks of a third playthrough that I did. And yeah, who knows, maybe someday I'll play the original. Maybe that's the one thing that some of those Zelda games I've tried needed, is a appreciation for a fun playthrough like this. Unfortunately, not a lot of other options, though, if I like this sort of thing for me in the series, because a lot of the other games either have that top-down perspective, and I heard the PS2 one's kind of weird. Maybe I'll still check it out at some point, but then that pretty much just leaves the most recent game, Visions of Mana, which I did pick up. I don't know when I'm going to get to it. A lot of games, especially action RPGs, I want to get into, and and a few other series to try out, but hey, definitely curious, especially too if they announce a new one, I might, want to get caught up and, be there for a new one.